Hello, everyone. My name is Ernie Broughton. I'm a senior advisor with the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, and I'd like to welcome you to ECI's December Best Practice Forum, The Impact of DOJ Guidance on Corporate Compliance Programs. First of all, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Navex Global, and a couple of logistics before we get started. Please use the chat box and let us know where you're joining us from and see who else is on the call today, who you may know. Please note that we're going to have two polls during this session. And so when you're directed by the moderator to complete a poll, just open the polls tab, which is going to be next to the chat to participate. Also, you can use the polls tab to submit your questions to the speakers at any time during the presentation, and we encourage you to do that. Finally, please access the Files tab to download the summary findings for the report that we're going to be talking about today, and the slide deck that we'll be using to convey the findings. And on that note, I would like to introduce Skip Lowney, a senior survey researcher with ECI, who will go over some of the critical high-level findings of the survey that is the basis for this particular forum. Skip, welcome.
Thank you, Ernie. I'm glad to be here and glad to be showing everybody these findings, these summary findings today. And then, of course, we're going to lead into the discussion by our panel of experts, and we'll actually I'll re-reference them later in the presentation and to their incredible value they bring. And they may not know this, but the survey findings reveal something great about them. So we conducted, that is ECI conducted a survey of compliance professionals. I will share my screen here, get us going. And give me a moment. I'm sorry, this isn't a technical difficulty. This is a user difficulty. We're getting there. So from the beginning. Okay. So we have here the selected findings. We have the full report, and everybody's going to have access to that. Can everybody see the screen? Anybody nod their head? Great. Okay. And we will now move forward. And what our survey did was it was designed to understand the impact of the DOJ enforcement efforts. There's certainly 4 guidelines, and then corporate compliance programs, how they intersect with one another. We looked at the utility of the guidelines, what value organizations are finding from them, how do they apply those guidelines, what do they do with the information and the guidance within them and the policies that are set out. And what incentivizes use of the guidelines, and also what incentivizes creating a corporate compliance program, and an effective one at that. And then ultimately, we did ask all of the respondents open-ended questions, and we gathered information about ways that DOJ and organizations could work better together. Very insightful information, some very good suggestions came from that. And from the experts today, we're going to be hearing a lot of discussion around that intersection of the organizations and DOJ, and some ideas and some thoughts about ways to improve that working relationship. So with that, the 4 documents that I referenced, and there'll be a little more detail about this later, are the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. That was updated in June 2020. Originally, it was issued in February 2017. That has to do with creating effective programs, and then also does address remediation of incidents, and also working with the DOJ. The second piece is on the guidelines for taking disclosure, cooperation, and remediation into False Claims Act matters. That was issued in March 2019. We have the Resource Guide to the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That was the second edition. The first one came out in 2012. And then finally, the evaluation of corporate compliance programs in criminal antitrust and investigations. So 4 guidance documents. And then we had a 5th section in the survey asking questions about incentivizing compliance to find out what compliance officers and those in the field and their equivalents would see as being helpful to create an effective program, to build a strong culture, and then to cooperate and remediate any violations or potential violations that happen. As you see here, we did it by email. We had an anonymous link. We had that anonymous link was posted at different locations, but we have Tom Fox Compliance and Ethics blog site. Tom is here today. We have the Volkov Law Group's blog site, and everybody's here from NAVEX as well, Carrie and Michael. So we had 248 respondents. We received information from organizations that were from size 25 to 90,000 employees. The plurality, about 20%, came from organizations between 5 and 10,000 employees in size, but about 50% came from organizations between 2,500 and 20,000. So substantially sized organizations, and we have many from 12% from over 90,000. So quite a broad range of information or of organizations were represented, as also you can see by US only and multinationals, and then the mix of industries. So what value do these resources provide? We see that familiarity is one of the first questions we asked. Did the individual know about the resources? And we see here that 88% knew about and felt familiar with the corporate compliance program evaluation guidance. The low familiarity rating was there around FCA related policies. That's something we'll look into a little bit today, talk about tangentially at times. Why is that maybe a little bit lower compared with the others? Again, we see the antitrust compliance program guidance awareness at 59% saying that they're familiar with that. We do know that familiarity was affected by what industry an organization was in, how broad their operations were, and the level of risk. Need to look up a finding here. For example, leaders, ethics and compliance leaders who were working in organizations with operations in more than one country they were 80% more likely to be familiar with the CEP as explained in the FCPA resources guide compared with those leaders whose operations were only in one country. So 90% of those whose organizations had operations in multiple countries were familiar with these resources compared with 50% of those who only had an operation in one country. The report has some other findings around that, so you can go to there to see more of that detail around the breadth of operations, the level of risk, and the industry. But it sort of goes without saying, and this would be, I think, understood that organizations are going to use the resources that apply to them. So that's really what the main takeaway there is. How helpful did individuals find these resources? We asked, so one of the things that I didn't say is that in constructing this survey, when we were talking about these 4 resources, we essentially used the same questions for around each resource. So, asking how helpful it was, what about their briefing plans, what about the applicability of it, and then what would incentivize use of it. So that's why we're able to see here results across these 4 resources that are comparable to a degree. So, there's a helpfulness question. Certainly with the evaluation guidance, this first one, the helpfulness in understanding the criteria used to evaluate an effective program, a compliance program, that is. So what does DOJ look for when they're doing an evaluation of an effective program? And 90% of respondents said that they found the guidance document helpful in understanding those criteria used to evaluate programs. With respect to antitrust, the same thing applies. How helpful is the antitrust compliance program guidance to understanding DOJ's efforts in evaluating effective programs? And here we see 82% said that they found the guidance helpful. The FCA-related policies and the CEP is in the FCPA, those questions asked how helpful are the guidance documents in determining and understanding the criteria used to determine credit. So not how helpful were they in understanding an effective program, but what was DOJ doing and how well were they conveying in those documents that how well was DOJ conveying its practices in determining credits, so that people could say, I know what DOJ is looking for when they're trying to determine credits for a program and for the efforts that we've undertaken. And we see again here, over 70% or higher say that the policies were helpful. What about the impact of the resources? Here we have a question which was asked saying, do you plan to revise the program in response to the resource? And the answers that we see here, the left bar, is the percentage of respondents who said yes, we are planning, we have revised the program, or we plan to revise the program in response to the issuance of this document. And then we see on the right, the percentage who say they don't or will not be revising their program or don't plan to. With regard to the CECP, the Corporate Compliance Program Evaluation Guidance, 76% of respondents said that they were going to be revising their program or have revised their program already. Here's an instance where the FCA-related policies document elicited much less effort to revise the program or plans to revise the program. Only 39% of respondents said that they did anything in response to the issuance of those policies. Things rise again when it comes to the FCPA resources guide and the antitrust compliance, where over 50% of respondents said that their organization has revised their program because of these documents. So you see in the corner here about a piece saying elements likelihood of being revised, employee training. 62% said that that was something that they worked on as part of the revision, and 25% mentioned E&C authority and related controls is something they've revised. Pat's going to be talking more about that later, so I will leave that for her, and she's going to show a lot more detail. But essentially, organizations do take the information that DOJ issues and they do make changes to their program. There's definitely a value. There are organizations that don't do something with regard to this. And in the case of the CCP evaluation guidance, the compliance program guidance, where we saw that 24% of organizations said they did not revise their program or don't plan to, 72% of those individuals said that their program was sufficiently designed. And if we look at this column here in the center of this slide, 72% said that their program was sufficiently designed so they didn't need to make any revisions to their corporate compliance program. 64% said the same thing, and that with regard to FCA-related policies, so they weren't making changes. With regard to FCPA, 69%, and then with regard to antitrust, 67%. So there are most individuals, 2/3 or more of individuals aren't revising their programs because they feel that what they have currently in place in their organizations is sufficient. They have enough. Interestingly, this right-hand column, there's a notable percentages who said that the resource was not material. That is, it didn't provide them something that they've found of value or use in making revisions to their program. With respect to the corporate compliance program guidance, it's 9%. But when we look at the FCA and the FCPA, we see about 1 in 5, 19%. And even the same with antitrust, 17%. About 1 in 5 individuals who didn't make a revision to their program said the material, the guidance, the policy wasn't valuable enough for them to do anything with. So what's something else that individuals would do with this information after it came out? Did they brief other individuals in the organization? These 4 bars are, the 4 sets are again for the evaluation, the CCP evaluation guidance, FCA, FCPA, and antitrust. Within that, the 4 bars are, this is the information, the percentage of individuals who briefed their board or board committee. And we see in this first one, 83% briefed their board or board committee on the corporate compliance program. 83% briefed their senior management team. 85% briefed their legal department, and 93% briefed the E&C team. E&C is almost in every case, three of these cases, on really in the fourth almost, the number one group that gets briefed. Boards, they lag behind with respect to the senior management team and the legal department. So E&C clearly sees that value and the need to inform all of its members on what DOJ has put out. I mean, with the lowest case here, we see 79% brief their E&C team on the FCA related policies. But in that same case on FCA, only 59% briefed their board on the policies after they were issued. And again, we saw before from the previous slide, reasons for not. The program is sufficiently designed, seem to be the leading reason. So they feel comfortable in the position they're in. I will say, we all know that some organizations get in trouble. That will happen and does happen, but most of them feel they're doing a pretty good job, I think, from the evidence there. And then I think with this briefing as well, they don't necessarily need to approach some of the individuals, so they feel they don't need to. So what incentivizes compliance? These are very complicated, but the basic piece is that organizations are looking for credit, or they're looking for DOJ to recognize what's being done and also accommodate situations or conditions that happen. So for example, this first one, 96% of the respondents said that providing credit to companies with an effective program when an employee reports externally first, that is, they've gone outside the organization, they didn't tell anybody inside, they went straight to DOJ or to another appropriate authority and reported, organizations want to be sure that they receive credit for the work they've done for an effective program, even if that individual didn't come to them first. So that's, and they said clearly that would incentivize having an improved and effective compliance program. We have four other incentives that this work revealed. There's, second from the bottom, the elimination of exclusion or debarment when there is an effective program. This does raise the question, what's an effective program? And one has to, that definitely generates a discussion around what are the metrics to measure an effective program. But if that is established, that having an effective, and organizations have an effective program, however that's defined and set up, then organizations would like to see elimination of exclusion or debarment. So how aware are individuals of DOJ's efforts in declining prosecution, negotiating plea agreements, and awarding credit? Not very. The highest number here is that 42%, and this is the third row, say that DOJ is consistently awarding credit for self-disclosure, cooperation, and remediation of violations with respect to FCPA. 53% basically aren't sure. 57% if you add up that and then disagree. We see the highs here at 70% and 72% for DOJ awarding credit for self-disclosure on FCA policies, and 72% for DOJ declining prosecution and negotiating plea agreements for antitrust violations. So there's so clearly an opportunity for DOJ to do more, or for organizations to figure out a way to get into a channel where they are aware of what DOJ is doing when it comes to declining prosecution, negotiating agreements, and awarding credit. Here's where I wanted to reference back to the people that are on the call today. These are experts. Where do these organizations get their information about DOJ enforcement actions? We see here that at the top bars, association, trade group reports, notices, emails, leading experts, practitioners, blogs. 61% in 2010 got their information that way. my math is going to lose it 30, 40, 60, 57% get that information these days. About 15% get it from DOJ directly, or 17% this year. So really, people look to the experts, and we're going to be hearing from the experts in a few minutes. We see that from the left of this slide, familiarity with DOJ's enforcement priorities is pretty high, 80%, and familiarity with enforcement actions in the previous 2 years. So one would have to say that where they're getting that information is from the association trade groups and these bloggers and these leading experts. Finally, I just want to say one last thing about changing the likelihood of the disclosure. Organizations pretty much felt that the policy would make the companies more likely to disclose a False Claims Act violation, an FCPA violation, or an antitrust violation. At least approximately 50% or more say that the disclosure can be affected by what DOJ does. So I'm going to turn this over now to Pat, and she's going to moderate the discussion with our experts, and we will be looking forward to any questions.
Thank you, Skip. Great job. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I am Pat Harnett. I'm the CEO of the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. You may know that already, but I'm really pleased to be joined by colleagues and friends, and you heard Skip refer to them as experts a number of times. That's because it's actually true. And I will also say, just off the top, couple of housekeeping items. The findings that Skip just summarized are in a report of findings that was released today. It's available on ECI's website. I believe that before this program is over, Alyssa or a member of our team will be posting a link in the chat so that you can access it directly and download the report. So we welcome your taking a look at that. And I also, before I introduce the panel, want to say that doing a survey of chief compliance officers or the equivalent, limiting it to those folks alone, is not easy. They're hard to get to. They're hard to get to read the email. It's hard to get them to take the survey. And so that's why we enlisted the help of folks like Navex Global and Tom and Michael, because they have tremendous networks, great reach. They are well-respected thought leaders. They were really helpful in getting us to raise awareness and get CCOs to take this survey. So thanks to all of you for your promotional help in making this survey happen. So it's my pleasure first to introduce the panelists. Some of them are probably familiar folks to all of you. We have one additional person who is already a good friend of the ECI. So first, Carter Burwell serves as counsel at Debevoise and Plimpton. Carter is a member of the firm's white collar and regulatory defense practice. He has 15 plus years of experience in senior roles in the federal government, namely among them, he has worked as counselor to the Secretary of the Treasury. He has experience with the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. I know you have access to his bio on the platform. Welcome, Carter. It's great to have you here and to add your perspective. Carrie Penman, many of you probably know, she is the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer of Navex Global. Carrie, of course, has had a long history in the field because she was a Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Westinghouse for many years. She actually worked with our association for a number of years before she moved to Navex Global, and certainly brings a perspective of what's happening in companies, because Navex, as many of you know, is a provider of support in receiving reports of suspected wrongdoing from employees. Michael Volkov is the CEO of the Volkov Group. He, of course, has been in the field and has offered commentary both in writing and through a podcast over the years on compliance issues and also DOJ enforcement activity, but not just that. He has expertise in FCPA, the UK Bribery Act, OFAC, securities fraud, FCA. Michael leads a law firm and works with a lot of corporations when they are in entanglements with these kinds of issues. And not last but not least, Tom Fox is the founder of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you have not searched Tom's name and downloaded some of his podcasts, if you're not following him, you are missing out. I think he is now providing a platform for 80 plus podcasts in compliance. Every time I say that, he then corrects me because he's added a few more. But Tom also, I'm impressed, he's authored 19 books on compliance. I understand there are a couple more coming out before the end of the year. Again, just to promote something for him, if you have not purchased the Compliance Handbook, it's now in its second edition. Unbelievably thoughtful and comprehensive commentary about effective compliance, corporate compliance programs. So welcome all of you. It's great to have you. Looking forward to a lively conversation because that's just what we do when we get together. It's going to be fun. So let me just kick this off. You saw in some of the findings, Skip mentioned this very briefly, but we actually fielded a survey like this 11 years ago, and we did it in conjunction with SCCE, then ECOA. Our goal in doing it was that we knew the Department of Justice when they issue guidance or when everything that they do actually is something that's closely followed by our profession. But 11 years ago, there weren't any guidance documents, and we just wanted to learn, how are people learning about what DOJ is doing? What impact does it have on your programs? And so as we sit here today, we've done a survey of a number of documents. I think it's just important to start by recognizing how much has been done by the DOJ over the last several years. And so just to kick it off, what is the view that all of you have about the efforts by the DOJ to communicate their views about effective ethics and compliance programs? What's your perspective? We've all been in the field for a while. We all have views about this. I'll throw it open to whomever wants to hop in first.
Pat, I'll start. What I see and what was really illustrated, I think, by Skip's presentation or overview was the evolution of how the DOJ has communicated to us and for us and with us. Yeah. That communication used to be in the form of either opinion releases or enforcement actions. And I think Mike is credited with the phrase of reading the tea leaves. But when it came to best practices, compliance programs, we had speeches really starting with Leslie Caldwell in 2016 and 2017, laying out DOJ expectations. We had the 10 hallmarks in the original FCPA resource guide, but then starting with the release of the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Program in 2017, then updated with a new evaluation in April of 2019, and then the update in 2020, the DOJ has really laid out for us their expectations. And so I see this wonderful evolution, and wonderful because for the compliance professional, really the DOJ is laying out in a coherent, cogent fashion what we need to be thinking about for our compliance programs. The author, a large part of the first evaluation was authored by Wei Chen, and one of the most prescient comments I heard about her is, I want compliance officers to think. And I want them to use these questions posed in the evaluation to think about their compliance programs. So I really see an evolution in the DOJ's thinking and how they present information to us.
And Pat, I'll add that, certainly every time we have invited the DOJ to speak at one of our events, I know the same for you. We very much appreciate the fact that they're always willing to come on and talk about, their interpretation, what they're seeing. And so I think that, the willingness to come out and meet with the community and speak with the community has really been, I think, very important for a lot of two-way communication and learning the challenges that, each group faces as we deal with these questions. So I think I agree with Tom, they've come a long way, and I really appreciate the partnership every time, we ask for an opportunity to enlighten folks who are attending our events.
Mike,
Well, yeah, let me offer a couple of thoughts because I think Tom and Carrie have really sort of set it up nicely. What I have seen is, DOJ has become the force multiplier when it comes to the compliance profession. And if you go back and because I have the most gray hair on this panel, I can go back to the sentencing guidelines and what happened, how that was helped to push compliance. But it wasn't really until DOJ, and I would say one of the most important documents ever put out was the FCPA guidance in 2012. And Tom referenced the hallmarks of corporate compliance. That document is one of the most extraordinary documents. I don't think any prosecutors, I was a prosecutor for 25 years, we would never put out a document like that. They ultimately did, and it provided so much help to compliance professionals. It's put structure around difficult issues, expectations, and basically through their enforcement actions, through the material, the guidance they put out, they have elevated the compliance profession. And, look, I'd like to say we get some credit, but, they really have been the force multiplier here. Now, what's going to be interesting, I think, at this point is compliance is now sort of standing on its own 2 feet. And they're moving further. And in some areas here, particularly when we get to ethical cultures, I find that they're moving a little faster than DOJ. And I think the industry is learning that there's such a great value to the business from compliance, not just staying out of trouble, not just trying to scare people to get into compliance, but the compliance profession has done a great job in educating the business that businesses now recognize that this is a profitable area of our functions. Ethical cultures are profitable, mean greater profitability, mean greater sustainable growth over the long run. So I think what's going to be interesting is the industry is sort of pushing beyond a little bit of DOJ, while DOJ is also continuing to maintain this guidance.
I remember when, oh, go ahead, Carter, come on in.
I'll just join in at the end and want to start out by thanking you guys for having us and for putting together this incredible survey, because as Michael and Tom, noted, there is a long progression here of outreach by DOJ. But I think is what the survey shows is that it's important, that people care about it, and that DOJ really can do a much better job, with regard to some of these specific areas, and particularly the transparency that DOJ is seeking maybe, and the clarity that DOJ is seeking. But I know we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So thank you, though, very much for having us, and then putting together an incredible survey, which, as Skip went through, is incredibly comprehensive and really helps to show a path where DOJ can do a lot better job than what they're doing right now.
Sorry for interrupting you, Carter. We're in trouble when the moderator starts interrupting and overshadowing the speakers. Question one. I was just going to add, I remember when the DOJ was in process with the SEC looking at the FCPA resource guide, they brought in groups of compliance professionals, reached out to us, to all other associations, other organizations in our profession, and said, come in and tell us what the issues are, what the challenges are. And that had a direct influence on that guidance that came out. And we know that when they have done training of DOJ personnel, they have brought in practitioners. We hope that that's a trend that will continue. So we're going to pause and pose a poll question to the audience. And the first question asks you about which of the 4 DOJ resources that we have surveyed about have had the greatest influence on your company's E&C program. So if you would take a moment, I won't read all the answer choices because it's wordy and probably don't need me to read them to you. And hopefully you don't hear the leaf blowers outside my window. It's like unbelievably predictable.
Never fails.
It never fails. And I think as soon as the poll closes, Alyssa is going to share the results on the screen. Here we go. Hopefully everybody is seeing these results.
Wow.
Interesting. Not surprising about the corporate compliance program guidance. Little surprising that the others, well, 100% of people said that's the document. I think if we were going to guess, we would have said a big majority. 100%? Anybody surprised by that?
I'm not. I'm really not, because that is, it really is a great document, and the additions, the new edition that came out was very important as well.
Yeah.
So I think people that's the go-to document these days.
So, everybody now knows from Skip's briefing that when we did this survey, we literally asked participants to speak about or offer their perspectives of each of the guidance documents. We asked them about their awareness of it. How helpful was it to you? What did you do to adjust your compliance efforts or your program because of it? And a number of things. Who did you brief? So I thought it would be helpful to just spend a few minutes talking about these various guidance documents. Of course, we'll start with the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, the June 2020 update. When we asked the question in the survey, we specifically asked about that update to the document, which may have influenced people's responses a little bit. And not a lot of surprises. 88% of chief compliance officers said they were very aware or aware of the guidance. Similar percentages, 90% said they found it to be helpful. Yet at the same time, almost a quarter of CCOs, you saw this in Skip's slide, said that they didn't make any adjustments to their E&C program, and they don't necessarily plan to. What do all of you make of that? Is that, well, interested in your thoughts about why that is. Is it problematic, and what's your thought about it?
I'd
Well, I guess perhaps I could read it one of two ways. I could read it that they didn't need to make any changes based on the guidance. Perhaps that's too hopeful. Or if you went the other way, they weren't going to use the information given to them in a meaningful way, which might be viewing it as somewhat negative, and perhaps the truth is somewhere in between.
I'm not sure about how much of a departure the 2020 guidance was, whether there was anything radical or outlandish. It seems like generally it was a continuation of a prior policy. So reserving the time to pick your battles and make changes might be important here. I wonder if that had a little bit to do with it.
It's probably fair. I mean, of that 20, almost a quarter, 24%, I think 74% said that their program was already sufficiently designed. So had we asked this question with the first update, we might have had a very different answer.
And I hate to be the naysayer here or to raise problematic issues, but I was kind of surprised by the fact that this was used, or people responded to the guidance by focusing more on training and risk management. And that to me raised the question, because I think what the guidance has been pushing is proactive, continuous monitoring, auditing, and improvements. And I think that they've been pushing that idea because it's sort of the last leg of what they needed to push. And the fact that people were going back to some pretty basic concepts of risk management and training, that was a head scratcher to me. But maybe I'm just being, the glass is half empty type of thing.
You're actually raising a comment Michael, that actually we have a slide. Melissa, if you could pull it up and share, there's a table that appears in the report that Skip didn't share in his presentation. We did ask where did you make revisions to your program with respect to the DOJ evaluation guidance? And it gives a little bit of detail about that.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting, to be honest with you. I was expecting people to be saying, okay, we're looking at monitoring techniques. We're looking at continuous monitoring. And I didn't see much of that. And that made me think, okay, look, folks, we're a little further behind than we think we are. I also think that people, compliance people are very, unlike lawyers, they're optimists and they're very positive people. And so, I'm not surprised that they think they have a lot of the things that they need in place.
So you are all looking at, you were looking at, there we go.
There it is.
Is everybody starting to feel dizzy? You are looking at the, this is the response that people gave when we asked them, what did you revise with respect to your program? And it's just separated out by highest and lowest responses. So as you see, 62% of people, like Michael was just saying, said that they revised their employee training, followed by risk assessment procedures. But merger acquisition, joint venture procedure is least likely to have been revised based on the guidance. So I guess the question for the panel is, are we as a profession focusing on the right areas? Did folks, when they saw this update to the guidance, make the changes in all the places you would have thought that they should? Mike, we've heard from Michael, Tom, or Carrie, any thoughts?
So I'll add a thought. I think one of the areas that continues to be emphasized, I think more and more, is the issue of corporate culture. And, Michael, I think you mentioned that earlier. I think there is, more and more of a focus over time that the DOJ has put on corporate culture and on, issues of leadership, of issues of board engagement, and so on and so forth. And so I do think, and I noted from Skip's presentation, that the board was probably most likely to not have been briefed on some of the changes or some of the guidance. I think in many cases that may have been a missed opportunity, because I think any opportunity that we have to, raise the profile and raise kind of the conversation to the board level about our programs and what we're doing and the impact on culture, and to the point of previously noted about how we're playing more and more of a role in organizational strategy and supporting the business, as opposed to being kind of the naysayer. So I think that I probably would have liked to see more focus on organizational culture. Maybe folks feel that they already are there on that. But I do think there's also, some additional opportunities to take these things when they come out and have a dialogue about one or two new things with the leadership team, with the management team, and with the board.
Matt, if I could pick up on a point Carter raised, and I'm going to go way inside baseball with this answer. The June 1, 2020 update to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs updated an April 2019 document. I saw the three biggest changes in the update, the June 2020 document, as follows. Number one, risk assessments lead to continuous monitoring, lead to continuous improvement. Number two, compliance functions in the CCO had to have access to all data across corporate functions, no more data silos. And number three, that the chief compliance officer and the compliance function are the keepers of institutional justice and institutional fairness within corporations. So if we take that and then looking at the slide you have up, I see risk assessment procedures as near the top, which speaks to one of the changes, and also monitoring, auditing, and testing as one of the areas most likely to be revisited. In terms of the chief compliance officer having access to data, that's probably not a restructuring of your compliance program. So it wouldn't surprise me that it's on here. One of the reasons I think employee training is on here is I think most compliance practitioners still struggle with the concept of effective training. Not that we're putting it on, not that we're seeing whether people are doing it, not even seeing whether they're getting 80% right 10 minutes after they take their training, but is it truly effective? So by thinking about what changed with the update to the evaluation, I guess it's a very long-winded way of saying I'm not as surprised as I might have initially been thinking about it like that.
And
I do.
I'm sorry, Pat.
No, go ahead, Karen.
I would just add that I do think a lot of organizations struggle with doing risk assessment well. And, you know, that is a continued opportunity for program growth and frankly, for, again, demonstrating the impact on the value to the organization and strategy. So I'm not surprised to see risk assessment. And I think to Tom's point about some of the effectiveness changes that were written in 2020, you know, certainly there were many questions I think that were asked around that. But I do think almost every organization probably feels like we could do a better job on risk assessment and tracking changes in the business and what that means for our risk profile and what that means for, you know, how we might need to modify our program.
I think we can probably bring this slide. There we go. Hello, everybody again. I do think one of the things that's very telling is how much we are aware, and I think our profession is aware of what all these changes are. If nothing else, it's an indication of every communication that comes from the DOJ in the form of these updates. Our profession is really spending a great deal of time looking at it and thinking about what its implication is for companies. And to your point, Carrie, one of the other things that came out in the survey is that 90% of chief compliance officers said that they leveraged this guidance to increase discussion and awareness on the importance of culture. So that's kind of interesting because the guidance itself was not particularly descriptive around that. And yet people really emphasize that point in their companies. I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you about who was briefed within companies based on this guidance. And as you saw on the slides that Skip shared, chief compliance officers were most likely to have briefed the E&C team, the legal department second to that. They were less likely to have briefed the board, the senior management team, audit, risk management committee. What's your view of that trend? Is it understandable? Is it a missed opportunity? Is it altogether unwise? I know all of us have done presentations to boards. We are aware of the challenges that boards face when it comes to this conversation about ethics and compliance. What are your thoughts of that trend? Tom, do you want to start us off? I know you have thoughts about the board.
Sure. Absolutely. Anytime you can take information of the board, that's obviously going to be significant. But here, Pat, I'd like to draw upon really looking at it from the board's obligation. The Delaware Supreme Court has significantly ramped up the Caremark obligations for board oversight of compliance programs. And they have gone from, do you have a compliance program, to are you managing it? And are you actively engaging in oversight? And even into, have you questioned management about the information they have brought to you? Is it being sufficient? So we've had a series of requirements, civil requirements from the Delaware Supreme Court that really require boards to exercise active oversight. And so part one of bringing this information to the board is telling the board what they need to do, frankly. It's training the board, not on FCPA, but on compliance. And Carrie's shaking her head, and I know she has been talking about this for a long time, as much as anyone in our profession. You have to train the board, and then they have to engage in active oversight. So I'm gratified to see a high number to the board. But the second part is, anytime you have information from the regulators, you need to put that information in front of the board and ask them to think about this in overall risk management context. And so I'm a big believer in doing it for a variety of reasons, but make no mistake about it, boards are there's much more legal requirements on them now.
So Tom, I want to pick up on something you said earlier and then turn it back to the rest of the panel. But, you commented on the access to data, which was a significant part of the recent update. And so I think that is an opportunity to broaden the discussion as well to some of the other functional groups and, areas of oversight in the organization, the other groups that have the data that we're all expected to be sharing and learning from. So just to pick up on your point about that, I think that's a very important group, that if they haven't been briefed on what this all means and what is expected by the government, that it's a great opportunity to talk about the sharing of data.
If I can just take a moment to pound on the problem of corporate boards. And this is just something that I have been writing about. Tom and I actually just did a podcast recently on this issue and the change in Delaware law. I was surprised at how many people actually had gone to the board to present this. I viewed it as a positive. On the other hand, I know the audience, and first off, they don't understand compliance. They know nothing about how to conduct oversight and to monitor. Tom is being gracious when he says you got to train your board. You've got to spoon feed your board. These are people who do not pay attention. And the Delaware courts, and I think DOJ ultimately at some point, are going to make it very clear in some fashion or another. The problem that I have is that I would tell every CCO, look, any excuse you have to bring what Donna Bohm used to call board-worthy materials to the board, you bring it to them. And you get in front of the board. And if you can't get in front of the board, you've got a problem. When something like this comes out, this has got to be done. The board has no clue what they're doing. They have to be told, but you can't tell them that. And frankly, I've been before boards that they claim they knew what the FCPA was, but they really didn't. They had no clue what it was, but they know how to talk like they do. And this is a very difficult relationship. And I think that chief compliance officers have to devote more time and energy to this.
So Carter, just a follow-up question to that, because you have actually been on the other side of the equation for this from a policy perspective, having been in the enforcement community. I'm guessing that this particular finding is going to be of interest to the DOJ. Are our boards being briefed on what our guidance is? What are your thoughts about that? Tell us what you can about how DOJ views boards and their importance in all of this.
Yeah, that's certainly, I want to be cautious given my recent entry into the private sector, but certainly from the DOJ perspective, and I would say from an outsider perspective or a recent addition to the private sector perspective, I've got a lot more confidence and a greater expectation in the board and in their desire to be briefed and to be advised about how to ensure that the corporation is complying with all of its obligations. And I think of that as being so much of a critical function of the board, and particularly, certain board members who have been put there to make sure that the corporation, that the board and the CEO and the directors are all mindful of their obligations. So I was delighted to hear Tom and Mike's perspective on what they think the board is, how they're behaving. But certainly from DOJ's perspective, the board better be paying attention to this. And there's the expectation that the board is paying attention to this. And, in my limited experience, but critical experience now, boards are paying attention to this. And this is pretty far front and center there for their concerns. and they want to make sure that this is going properly. And going back again, this is why it's so critical that DOJ communicate what are clear guidance. And I think, again, incentives for strong programs, for empowered compliance officials, and ultimately that, cooperation is going to be beneficial to the corporation. And, I know we're going to get there, but sometimes I think that the recent articulations aren't going in that direction.
So I'm going to move us on now, and we won't spend as much time on the other guidance documents. So turning to the FCPA update, we've already paid homage to that guidance when it first came out. In the survey, we asked about the second addition to it. The trends were generally similar to the corporate evaluation of ethics and compliance programs in terms of awareness, helpfulness, who got briefed, the extent to which companies made any kind of changes. Any surprises, anything stand out to any of you with respect to the findings around that? Michael is shaking his head. No surprise.
Oh, no, I didn't know. Hold on.
Can you hear us?
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say that I wasn't really surprised by that. Frankly, the updates to me were just sort of, they added a new hallmark, which was important in there. But on the other hand, it sort of was updating the document to catch up with other documents and other guidance and capturing the new policies. I still think the document itself is a brilliant document. And, I have to tell Chuck DeRoss that every, time that I see him, that he's like a brilliant guy, because he played a big role in that, and the SEC obviously as well. It's an important document, and you'll never get prosecutors to ever write something like that. But if you go back in time, it was because of the political pressure that was building and concern about FCPA enforcement. And the DOJ deftly played this card beautifully. It was well done. And I admired it all the time. And I still go back to the document, after I read Tom's handbook, I then go to this, go look at this guidance.
Let me just give a shout out to the original FCPA resource guide. Michael talked about its importance within corporate compliance programs, but it was in 2012, and it is with the update, the single best resource on all things FCPA. If you need to review the law, if you need to review how the DOJ and SEC thinks about the law, it's in there. The hypotheticals were some of the best writing in both documents, both in terms of education for compliance professionals, but also how compliance professionals use those in compliance program training for their employees and for their board. For the first time, we had declinations, information given on declinations was put in the original FCPA resource guide. And of course, that was brought forward. So all of us have asked for more information on declinations, and we're all right, but the DOJ has not been able to do that as yet, but they did in the original resource guide and brought that forward. So it really is still the best single resource for all things FCPA, and everything we've talked about in terms of the evaluations of corporate compliance programs into all its iterations is an adjunct to the original resource guide. So Mike talked referenced Chuck DeRoss. I'm going to give the same shout out to Kara Brockmeyer, because she headed the SEC FCPA unit when the original 2012 FCPA resource guide was released.
And
My
Carter, you better walk over to Kara's office.
I was literally in her office. I was in my office, our office at Debevoise today. I was literally in her office. We were both there in the office together. It was delightful in light of COVID chaos. But Kara and I were talking about it just this morning. So thank you so much for mentioning her. And she's an incredible colleague and resource.
We'll send her a link to this in case she wants to clip it and use it for promotional material. I remember being in a room in the DOJ in a focus group, so to speak, listening session, I think was their term, with practitioners. Carrie, you may have been a participant in some of these things, but when they asked what would be helpful to you in terms of this guidance, people said hypotheticals, give us case studies, any detail you can provide about what helps, what influences the way you are making decisions. And it was really nice to see that that came out in the resource guide. I'll also add, there is a footnote. I used to know the number, but I don't know it anymore, where they cited ECI's research, but I didn't look to see if in the second edition that actually made it, that stayed in there, but it was nice to see too, that they were interested in seeing what research is coming out of industry. So I'm going to move us on again. Let's talk a little bit about the False Claims Act guidance. Michael, I know you are, I think our panel agreed, you are our FCA expert among us. So what stood out to you among the findings in the survey?
Well, thank you for the graciousness of calling me an expert. Let's put quotes around that. But I will say, the findings to me were not surprising in this sense. The False Claims Act guidance is really, it's comparing apples and oranges in this sense. It doesn't really have guidance as to the function, the functional elements of a compliance program. If anything, this may be an area where we could see more sort of guidance, more specifics from the Department of Justice, particularly from the civil fraud folks who are responsible for False Claims Act prosecutions. And so we didn't see, I'm actually surprised that people were as aware as they, as it showed up, because there wasn't, sort of going through the elements of a compliance program or a False Claims Act type of situation. It also, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but Carter, I think has really, sort of teed up the issue of transparency in DOJ communications. And this is probably one area where DOJ has not provided really much transparency or communication at all in real live cases to say, here's what we did, here's how much we credited, here's what we didn't credit. I will say this, that it's not as difficult a decision for usually people who are government contractors to decide to cooperate, because they have no choice, because they're going to be excluded from participating in federal healthcare programs or be debarred or suspended from contracting in the defense industry. So it's a different dynamic. And but I think Carter's point about we need more from the government to explain things is absolutely pertinent here. And we still also have issues in other areas, but this is an area where I really think that people are desperate for it. Like, tell us how to do a compliance program on this. And I tell people, just start auditing, audit everything, just look at all the money and follow the money. But that's not much guidance in that sense. So I think this will dovetail to sort of Carter's lead on sort of the transparency issues.
One thing I should have pointed out, thank you, Michael, for that, was that the people who answered questions about that guidance were those who said that they have, it's a key risk area for them. And so it narrowed the number of people so that the responses were really speaking to the group to whom the FCPA applies. The same, the FCA, the same was true for antitrust. And one thing that stood out in the findings was that the people who answered these questions about the antitrust guidance said that they were qualified because it was a key risk area. And you would think that because they said that this was a key risk area, that they would make adjustments to their compliance efforts based on the guidance that was released by the DOJ. And yet we saw that 44% of chief compliance officers said that they didn't, only 44% said that they did make adjustments. The majority did not. What do you make of that? Any takers?
Well, I don't want to keep babbling. So if somebody else has, I mean, I can talk about antitrust because I think people don't see antitrust as we need to spend more time on it. And criminal antitrust right now is a huge risk area. And I frankly think that there's a lot of work to be done by chief compliance officers, but there's a strange sort of history here where legal plays a big role in antitrust issues, even defining them to start with. And so there's sort of a weird division. There's criminal that needs to have robust compliance, but you have legal sort of in the middle of this, trying to define where the boundaries are on certain civil antitrust issues. So it's a strange animal. I thought the guidance was terrific, and there's some terrific suggestions in the guidance as to specific tools that should be considered beyond the general evaluation guidance. So I hope people will spend a little bit more time with it. And all you need to do is go through an antitrust criminal investigation. And I will tell you, I've been there several times, and companies really go through the ringer. I mean, they just go through the ringer.
From Pat, from the compliance practitioner and compliance program perspective, perhaps the biggest insight I got from the antitrust division's evaluation of corporate compliance program document was the much more sophisticated use of data. And that antitrust, of course, I think an antitrust analysis lends itself to more data because you're looking at anti-competitive issues, pricing, those sorts of things. But that sort of data analytics approach really presaged what we saw in the update released June 1, 2020 from the fraud section. So I think now we have many more compliance practitioners who have access to the data. And of course, the next step is to garner the data and then actually analyze it. So I think also that was one of the big impacts coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic was increased use of data analytics in the compliance profession simply because we couldn't go do an investigation on site. We couldn't do many of the investigative tactics and strategies we previously employed, and we had to use data as the kind of first pass to see if something warranted further investigation. So I think we're going to see more of that, even if the response on this particular survey perhaps wasn't as high as we might have hoped for or expected.
Thank you, Tom. So I think pressing on a little bit further, it's reasonable to assume, I think, and Carter, you can tell us if you think otherwise, but part of the DOJ's, one of their goals in issuing these documents is to encourage self-disclosure, cooperation by companies in the event or when these kinds of violations occur. And we saw that 60% of chief compliance officers said that they thought the DOJ's policies would make them more likely to disclose. Particularly, I think the question was pertaining to FCA, FCPA violations. But we also saw, and you saw this in Skip's slides, a very direct relationship between chief compliance officers feeling that the DOJ is consistently awarding credit to their likelihood of actually thinking that their company would self-disclose, even though these guidance documents are in existence. What are your thoughts around all of that? I mean, we've all done lots of conferences and events where we've had lots of discussions about self-disclosure and cooperation in the enforcement process. Any surprises in the findings around this?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I mean, I think the survey is clear that if the DOJ clearly and expressly incentivizes cooperation and collaboration, and really is willing to say that your penalties are going to be lower, clearly, expressly on the document, that professionals are coming in, that they're going to disclose fully, that if they that if they feel that that's genuine, that if DOJ is going to welcome them and that they're not going to play a gotcha game. And if it's not a game of saber rattling and enforcement, that compliance professionals are all going to credit that and show up. The challenge is like DOJ at times is not very clear about this. And, the political atmosphere, or as I kind of say, the saber rattling is just going to dissuade folks from coming in. And the more punitive an approach that DOJ takes, the less cooperation, the less collaboration, the less coming forward. And, at the end of the day, there are only so many FBI agents who are going to make cases. And, DOJ, I think, needs to understand that it has a huge resource that it's not using to its fullest extent. And I think the survey bears that out, and DOJ should pay attention to it.
Thanks, Carter. Other thoughts?
So Pat, the question, or at least the answer reads, providing credit to companies with an effective compliance program where an employee reports externally first. I think in many ways, unfortunately, that information exists. It's just not communicated to the compliance professional. And I'm referring to declinations. Simply because an external resource reports or the DOJ or SEC finds out about something doesn't mean there's been a violation, or there doesn't mean there's going to be an enforcement action. Indeed, there are lots of declinations which are not self-disclosure declinations that occur. We just don't know those facts, and that's not something DOJ, other than the limited amount of information in the resource guide, has given to us. So that would be absolutely an appropriate or a very helpful piece of information and incentivize. But I don't want people to forget that to get a declination, there are 4 prongs, the first of which is self-disclosure, but it also includes enhancing your compliance program extensively and extensive cooperation with the Department of Justice. That's if you find yourself in an enforcement action. So ramping up your compliance program, even if someone has externally reported, and really putting in a best practice program pays significant dividends in terms of the discounts you're given, up to 50% of the sentencing guidelines proposed fines. And with the 2 FCPA enforcement actions we saw in 2021, both of those companies had very, very, very bad facts with no self-disclosure, but got significant credit for having a extensively improved compliance program. So the incentive is there. I don't want people to forget there is an incentive, even if you do find yourself caught in an enforcement action.
Thank you, Tom. Any thoughts from anyone else?
Just to build on Tom's comment, because the DOJ corporate compliance program guidance did point out that they would be looking both at the compliance program that was in effect at the time of the offense, as well as at the time of the charging decision, or the conclusion of the investigation. So I think it is really an important opportunity that even if there is an investigation potentially ongoing, that it's still very important to continue to build on your program and to be able to demonstrate that you take the allegation seriously and the investigation seriously.
And one point, and I'd be sort of curious to see what everybody thought about this, but I thought Lisa Monaco's recent speech, she's the Deputy Attorney General, and I thought that her recent speech was very interesting in the way that she, pretty much said, you better have an effective compliance program. She didn't mince many words here, that if you're going to deal with us and you're going to walk in through the threshold into DOJ, you better have an she said it straight out. You better have an effective compliance program, or else you will be penalized. And what I'm wondering is that comment consistent with sort of what the incentives have been structured. And
Mm.
she also said, we're also going to have more, corporate compliance monitorships, which I think there should have been anyways, because how some of those cases went through without them is, whatever. But I do think her comment is kind of, I'm not going to exaggerate it, but I just think it's kind of interesting in the context of what's been said already. And Carrie's sort of fine point about, they look at it at two times, one when the offense occurred, but also at the time you're resolving the case.
So Michael, your comment tees up a poll question that we have for the audience. So I believe Alyssa is going to help us get that launched. And it pertains actually to the October 28th memorandum that Lisa Monaco authored or distributed. And I know there's a lengthy set of answer choices, but it's basically asking, based on your familiarity with that memorandum, which of the following statements best describes your view of the most important implications of that memorandum. You were faster in answering than I was in reading it. So the majority of people said entering a period of increased enforcement by DOJ. We're all trying to read the tea leaves based on the memorandum. Overreaching, interesting. Anybody thoughts on the responses by the audience?
I think, it's funny, reading this, or seeing the poll, obviously that's the rhetoric is that there's going to be increased enforcement. The question is that good or is it bad? And is increased enforcement actually going to discourage greater cooperation and is going to discourage greater investment in compliance and in establishing these programs? That's my worry from the Monaco memo. That's my worry from the rhetoric, that it is overreaching, and that I'm concerned that that's the path DOJ is going down.
So I know when we were talking as a panel in preparation for this, we spent a little time talking about the reference in that memorandum to the Yates memo and the implications of that. Thoughts that all of you have about that?
Well, I think that's really the mentioning of the Yates memo to me is they did tweak some of the language in terms of and the requirements as to when you cooperate, you have to, make findings and present evidence as to all individuals who are involved in the underlying offense. I mean, I think that's important, but I also see them, I don't see a great change in terms of individual enforcement. I mean, to be honest with you, the rhetoric has not really matched the results yet. We haven't seen much. This was a really slow FCPA year, which is inexplicable to me. The rhetoric of having a national, strategy against corruption, and we're going to have one of the lowest enforcement years yet. And I did talk to David Last, who is the chief of the FCPA section. I know him, he's a great guy. And he says, don't worry, Mike, the cases are coming. And it could be a pipeline sort of, as timing type things work out. But I do think that the rhetoric, they better match it up. I still think that, we are suffering, and I think prosecutors, if they replicate what happened in 2008 and 2009 and don't bring people to justice, there's a lot of cynicism around sort of the criminal justice process. And I think that they better be careful to not get so far in front of their skis on the rhetoric. And I think Carter's right. And the other important fact that I saw in the survey was that notwithstanding all this, most people viewed all of their risks as low. for enforcement, FCPA, False Claims Act. And I'll just tell you this, you can view it as low, but if you get caught, there's nothing worse. As I used to say, I'd rather get a root canal without any Novocaine than go through some of those things. And so you really, this is a big issue. I do think that maybe we can dovetail it back into transparency and the need for more information on how the system really works. And like Tom said, we had declinations in 2012. We need to get more information in that area. What is happening within the wheels of justice?
Carrie has mentioned several times this afternoon about corporate culture. And Lisa Monaco in her speech referenced corporate culture as, if not the key, certainly one of the most key indicators of whether a company was going to do business ethically and in compliance. And let me tie that into perhaps the most controversial, or at least most talked about part of the Monaco speech, which was that the DOJ would now evaluate all prior conduct, not simply FCPA cases for FCPA enforcement actions. They would look at as broad as sexual harassment, EEOC, environmental, FCA. It didn't matter what the claim was. We recently had the ACI National FCPA Conference, where a large part of the dialogue was pushback from white-collar defense lawyers on that point, and the DOJ responding, no, we're going to look at it. And we want to look at all conduct, because that goes to corporate culture, which is what not only Carrie has talked about today, but frankly, she talked about that for a long time. And she continues to talk about it because it is so important. So I saw that really through the lens of what I've learned from Carrie, which is you really do have to take a holistic approach. And maybe the DOJ is now saying, we're going to look at your culture. And if we see different areas where there have been violations, we're going to take that into account. As Mike said, the proof will be in the pudding, and they'll have to follow through on this. But if they do, it really opens up not only a new area of inquiry for the Department of Justice, but a new area for we as compliance practitioners to help drive home the message of ethical behavior and doing business in compliance in all areas of the law.
Carrie, any thoughts on that? I know you have talked a great deal about the importance of culture, and I think it's always a delicate thing too, as much as we need the DOJ to help us emphasize the importance of culture, because it gives heightened importance to business leaders, to boards for culture. At the same time, there are implications of DOJ evaluating culture, so what are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of organizations and I don't know how the DOJ does an evaluation of an organization's culture, right? They talk about it a lot in the guidance. Fortunately, I've not been through one of their evaluations, so I don't know how they come in. Maybe Carter can elaborate on how the DOJ really does an assessment of corporate culture. But, I do think, we're seeing a change in the way employees address concerns. We're seeing, we just saw the SEC Office of the Whistleblower report come out with double the external tips that they received in the prior year, which I think doubled from the previous year. So, we're seeing a lot of incentives for organizations, and frankly, to kind of, I would say, almost lose the opportunity, whether it's on their end or on the focus of the regulators, making it far more attractive or necessary to report directly to the regulators to have protection from retaliation. But I think that the shift in how employees are being encouraged to interact with their compliance programs, to be encouraged to interact with the government is, something is definitely changing. I think we are seeing a group of employees coming in who are far more comfortable to take their issues to social media, to take their issues to the government. And especially now with COVID, feeling, I think, less connected to their organizations. I think we're seeing a shift in culture that we probably need to take a look at. And we're seeing a shift in kind of where employees are finding their comfort level in interacting with the compliance program.
Pat, if I can jump in, one last point is, I think going back to the survey, which seems to show that corporate culture is built on cooperation and collaboration and incentives to come in and report. And the challenge is that if DOJ is taking a stronger enforcement path, a less collaborative enforcement path, you're going to have less incentive to come in and collaborate with them and share, and you're going to get less credit. And ultimately, you're going to defeat what is the opportunity for the culture to grow in the corporation, to behave ethically and police some of these problems on their own. That's a concern, I think.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So as a final lightning round for all of you, I want to close with your thoughts about what the DOJ, from our industry, what would we say to the DOJ, or if you were in a meeting with them, what would you suggest that they could do as they think about further updates to these guidance documents, or further thinking about their enforcement practices or priorities? Michael, would you like to start us off?
Well, I want to sort of jump on Carter's bandwagon here, because I think he's and Carter, I give you a lot of credit for this, but I think what
The first
really
time
needs
in my life. So thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, I think it really goes back to the relationship that we're going to have, the compliance community is going to have with DOJ. And I think there has to be, Pat, you've made several references to it already, about meetings that occurred in the past and the importance of bringing the compliance community in. We usually get these comments and speeches which start with, you guys are our friends, I love you, you're all, compliance people in front of a compliance group. But I think we need a little bit more love than just a general statement. I think they need to sit down with people like Carrie, Tom, Carter, with the organization like ECI, and start to have more of a dialogue, because we can provide them a window into, let's have a conference of some sort, but let's talk about how can we make disclosure work better, how can we make transparency work better, and how can we help you to educate people on these incentives that you want to create. And in the end, I think the history of the compliance profession has been, we've always had a good relationship with the government, and we've never, been really at odds. We've have a common interest, and I think that's got to be rekindled again. And I'm hopeful that this new administration will do that. And I think that the value of this is readily apparent to the business and to hopefully to the ECI playing a lead role in that.
We have just a couple more minutes left. Tom, couple seconds for you.
I would-
Thoughts about what you would recommend?
I would say the same thing I've said to every head of the FCPA unit from Chuck to Ross forward. Please publicly release information on the declinations you issue.
Brief and to the point. Carrie, thoughts from you?
Thoughts for me are, there's multiple documents, and Pat, you and I have talked in the past about how all of these principles have evolved over time, but they still stand on many of the same principles. And I would love to see that there's an overarching expectation of an effective compliance program that includes culture, that includes protections from retaliation. And certainly there's going to be specifics for FCPA and antitrust and False Claims Act and all of the rest. But I would love to see them align on a common set of principles across the various agencies.
Thank you. Carter?
Do more surveys like the one you just did. Share it with DOJ and make sure that they pay attention to it. And sorry, my last thing that I'll say is Lisa Monaco in her memo says that she's going to start a corporate crime advisory group. but that group is all a bunch of DOJ people. Have compliance experts join that group. We mentioned in my call, like I was most recently at the Treasury Department. It was amazing how the Treasury viewed the financial institution compliance groups as a force multiplier. They were our partners in policing illicit finance. I wish that DOJ would take that approach. And one way that they could try and do that is put some of these pros who are on this call on that corporate crime advisory group. Let it not just be a love fest between the FBI and the DOJ and the IRS and all the SEC talking to each other, but really learn from folks on the outside and partner with people on the outside.
That's a great suggestion. And I'll just add as we start to wrap up that we have high hopes that we'll have an opportunity to sit down with the DOJ and share these findings. Some of the insights and the suggestions that came from participants are really extremely helpful and mirror a lot of what this panel has said. So thank you, Tom, Michael, Carrie, Carter. Thank you so much for being here, for your wisdom and insights. And thank you so much for everything that all of you are doing to help our profession. We knew from this survey, we learned it, that you all play an important role in helping our professionals in our field know what's happening with the DOJ. So thank you for all the time and energy you put into that. And thank you to all our participants. I'll just add that if you have further thoughts, further suggestions, especially as we seek opportunities to communicate with DOJ, please email them to us. You can email it to either through our website, through the links that are there. We welcome your suggestions. And also as you get the evaluation for this event, we'll be happy to hear further from all of you. One quick reminder, we have an annual meeting of ECA members on Friday. So if you have not signed up to participate in that, we welcome your registering for that so you can hear about our plans for next year. And also, I know that Alyssa posted in the chat links to download this report. If you have any trouble accessing that, please contact ECI. So I think that wraps it up for us. Thank you all again for being here. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
And happy holidays to all of you.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.